Why do we like bad guys so much? Why are audiences ready to empathize with Darth Vader, Draco Malfoy, the Joker or Professor Moriarty? Didn't mean it as a compliment. Maybe it's the attraction of the forbidden fruit, the fact that deep down in each of us lives this suppressed desire to break the rules. Meet a bad guy from ancient Egypt. Perhaps the oldest known bad guy in history. Briber, thief, rapist and murderer. And at the same time one of the most famous non-royal ancient Egyptians. Unlike movie villains, this guy was quite real. 3,200 years ago, an Egyptian named Paneb was a real badass. I am the danger. He was born in the village of tomb builders called Set Mart around 1244 BC, during the reign of Pharaoh Ramses II. I briefly introduced you to Paneb in one of my previous videos, where I talked about the tomb builders village in Thebes and the huge array of texts that fell into the hands of archaeologists. You can still walk along the streets that are over 3,000 years old. I mentioned in an earlier video a document found in the village where Paneb was accused of having affairs with married women. Paneb slept with Mrs. Tui when she was the wife of the laborer Kenna. He slept with Lady Hel when she was Pendua's wife. He slept with Lady Hel when she was with Hesi Suneb F. And after he had slept with Hel, he also slept with Webhet, her daughter. It's funny, but in the comments to that video, many people spoke out in defense of Paneb. Some even admired his behavior. The guy's no slouch. Well, what's wrong? He just didn't like to sleep alone. He's just a young chap. Alas, adultery is not the only and not the worst charge brought against Paneb. But let's get to know our hero better. Paneb was one of 4 or 5 children born into the family of the worker Nefersenut and his wife Yui. Paneb's father was a hereditary stonemason, and his family had been engaged in building royal tombs since the time of King Horemheb of the 18th dynasty. The brigade in which Paneb's father had worked was led by someone named Neferhotep. It was the so-called right side brigade. 2 teams would work inside the tomb at the same time, each decorating its own side of the royal tomb, and each was headed by a foreman. When the worker Nefersenut died, the foreman Neferhotep, who had no children of his own, adopted his friend's son and made Paneb his heir. When Neferhotep's adoptive father was about 80 years old, he was killed under circumstances that are not entirely clear. Suspicious story. It's gone. Those were troubled times for Egypt, when the reign of King Seti II in Thebes was threatened by his competitor in Upper Egypt, Amenmesse, so the murder may be connected with the unrest that was taking place at the time. It is known that Neferhotep was a fairly rich man, as he could afford to wear fine linen clothes, drink wine, and even have a cow slaughtered for food from time to time. Found this place with lots of cool garbs. Not only did Paneb inherit his adoptive father's wealth, but he also took the vacated position of foreman. The first evidence of Paneb appears in the 66th year of the reign of Ramses II, when Paneb and his wife Wabet acted as witnesses at the conclusion of a certain transaction. This document also mentions their eldest son Arpechti. In addition, Paneb and Wabet had at least 3 other sons and 6 daughters, all of whom are mentioned in the texts in Paneb's tomb. Paneb probably built his tomb during the reign of Merneptah, son of Ramses II. But some Egyptologists believe he also tried to build a much larger and more impressive tomb, which was likely never completed and is yet to be found. A top-level foreman needs a premium tomb, doesn't he? The name Paneb is known from a number of sources. These include 32 ostraka and papyri, as well as inscriptions in Paneb's tomb, the tomb of his father, 4 stelae, and 5 graffiti from the Valley of the Kings. According to most surviving documents, Paneb was a fairly typical resident of the village who piously worshipped the gods and was a hard worker. We know that while Paneb served as a foreman, his team removed 1,170 tons of stone during the construction of the tomb of Seti II and 2,160 tons during the construction of the tomb of Siptah. An impressive job. And Paneb appears to be a modest villager, a hard-working foreman, genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist. One Astrakhan records that Paneb paid a worker 1.5 sacks of grain for the construction of a workshop or storeroom and for the installation of an additional wall at the rear of his house. The guy was improving his life, rebuilding a standard government-owned townhouse provided to him by the state. As a foreman, Paneb was also entitled to act as a judge and served on the village council of elders. Records of court hearings in which Paneb participated were found, including a libel case in which several workers claimed that the second foreman, Hei, had uttered a curse against King Seti II. The foreman in turn accused the workers of slander. The workers were punished and the matter was hushed up. Long live our court, the most humane court in the world! But what propelled Paneb to celebrity status was the so-called Salt Papyrus number 124. British antiquities enthusiast Henry Salt obtained this document in Deir el-Medina back in 1816. The papyrus has been translated several times. I'm familiar with its text from a translation made in 1929 by Yaroslav Cherny. The document is now in the British Museum. It's a piece of papyrus covered in hieratic writing in 2 columns on both sides. As you may have guessed, this is the same denunciation. The worker Amennacht informs the vizier about the unworthy and criminal behavior of the foreman Paneb. Apparently Amennacht had a strong personal motive to report the foreman. Personally, I feel so much hostility towards the victim. Amennacht was the younger brother of Neferhotep, Paneb's stepfather. After the death of his brother, Amennacht applied for the position of a foreman. Up to that point, his family had provided 3 generations of foremen. But the upstart Paneb bypassed him, and according to Amennacht, this was no accident. The first accusation he makes in the text is that Paneb bribed the vizier who made the decision. The papyrus says that as a bribe, Paneb gave the vizier 5 slaves that he had inherited from his adoptive father. Other gifts are also mentioned. 20 rams, okay 25, plus a premium Finnish-made fridge. Bribery charges was the making of a wicker bed for the chief priest of the Temple of Amun by Paneb's subordinates. This was probably another gift in exchange for some benefits. Another charge, using an official position for personal gain. According to Amennacht, Paneb, having become a boss, would force the workers of his brigade to do various tasks for him, such as building Paneb's personal tomb. The workers' wives wove clothes for the foreman, and one of the subordinates, named Nebnefer, looked after the foreman's ox for 3 months. Moreover, Paneb utilized valuable government-owned tools, picks and chisels he'd nicked from the royal construction site to build his own tomb. He broke one large chisel, and the workers had spent a month looking for another chisel before the foreman secretly brought it back. But that wasn't the worst yet. Paneb was accused of theft from the royal tomb. He used a piece of rock from a demolished wall in the tomb of Seti II to build 4 columns in his own tomb, and again forced his subordinates to participate in this. Amennacht then lists their names. In addition, Paneb stole a mummified goose from the burial of one of the daughters of Ramses II. And from the tomb of his colleague Nachmin, he snitched a bed and other stuff. He was also reported as having robbed other tombs too. However, he later swore by the gods that he hadn't stolen anything, which automatically made him an oath breaker. I swear by my freedom. From the funeral temple of the king, Paneb borrowed a chariot cover, wine, oil and incense, which was obvious sacrilege. In addition to that, according to Amennacht, the criminal took his wine and sat on the sarcophagus of the pharaoh, end of quote, an act that desecrated the shrine and offended the gods. Sitting with wine on the king's sarcophagus is unheard of audacity. Amennacht provides numerous pieces of evidence of Paneb's immoral behavior. We already know about his cohabitation with 3 married women. Moreover, as the text says, his son Arpekte testified against his father. He allegedly ran to the village guards and, swearing by the gods, reported on his father's adventures, his affairs with Mrs. Tuya, Hel, and her daughter Uphet. The son admitted that he himself slept with Uphet. How dare you offend the noble woman, you serf! Paneb had apparently been in a long-term relationship with Lady Hel, because she'd been married twice during their affair. She also divorced her second husband, Hesisuneb F. Wasn't it because she'd been cheating on him? By the way, Hasisuneb F began his life as a slave, but was adopted by Neferhotep, just like Paneb, and became a member of a brigade. Apparently, the two adopted sons had reasons for enmity. Amennacht also reports violence against another woman named Immoral. The text implies that Paneb took her clothes, quote, threw her against the wall and raped her, end of quote. And we're also told that he was a cruel and violent man who tyrannized his wife and children, end of quote. Paneb, an explosive and completely uncontrollable chap, quote, constantly beat up workers at a party, climbed a wall and threw bricks at people, end of quote, and threatened to kill some of his colleagues, including his adoptive father, quote. He pursued the chief master Neferhotep, my brother, even though he was the one who raised him. And he locked the doors in front of him and took a stone and broke the doors, and people started to guard Neferhotep because he said, I will kill him at night. And he beat 9 people that night. End of quote. Neferhotep allegedly reported this incident to the vizier Amenmes, who went on to punish Paneb, but the arrogant foreman complained about the unfair punishment to the pharaoh himself, and Amenmes was removed from office. Finally, according to Amennacht, Paneb actually killed several of the village residents. Quote, it was he who killed these people so that they could not report to the pharaoh. End of quote. This is how the papyrus ends. Maybe he also helped his dead pass into the netherworld. Who knows? His father made him an offer he couldn't refuse. Now we can't help but think of Paneb as a kind of embodiment of ancient evil. By the way, in English-language texts, worker brigades in ancient Egypt are designated by the word gang, so Paneb can be considered a real ancient Egyptian gangster. Are you gangsters? No, Egyptians. But unless you're planning to pen a Pinkerton-style crime novel set in ancient Egypt, instead of recreating actual history using the scientific method, you shouldn't be painting everything in black and white. There's a caveat to this story. The attitude towards certain acts in ancient Egypt could differ from what is considered normal in our society today. For example, the word bribe can also be interpreted as gift. We know that residents of the workers' village regularly sent gifts to the vizier, gave gifts to foremen and scribes, for example to get a promotion for their children. This is not a bribe, it's a gift. All taxes have been paid. During personnel reductions, gifts were sent to the vizier to thank him for not laying off certain workers. This was no secret. There are numerous records of such gifts. So bribing the vizier was not considered a terrible crime, although it did show off Paneb as lacking a certain degree of morality. Utilizing brigade workers for personal needs was common practice as well. According to the records, foremen regularly did that, and it's even stated as an official reason for absence from work. The workers made baskets, wooden statues and chests for their superiors, fed their oxen, and built their tombs. Perhaps Paneb exploited his subordinates a bit too often, but this could hardly amount to crime. That said, sex with married women, and especially rape, was condemned by Egyptian society. This is the local rapist. Bad guy. By the way, in some current publications, the denunciation of Paneb is called the oldest accusation of sexual violence against an influential person. The topic is seeing renewed interest in our time, when high-ranking men are often impeached over sex scandals in the West. The time has come to finally reveal the whole truth about this dirty abuser Paneb. Of course, the gravest charges are theft and murder. But how true were Amennacht's accusations? American Egyptologist Al Behrens believes that although the text is written in good handwriting, its content is rather incoherent. It seems that the offended elderly Amennacht dictated to the scribe everything bad about Paneb he could possibly think of to belittle his opponent as much as possible. I'm a poor orphan. I've been offended, robbed, and beaten. Behrens notes that seduction of married women is a common point in Egyptian accusatory texts. These accusations are found in a number of other cases, and the number of ladies seduced is always 3. Wasn't this a routine claim that was made up to portray the accused as not just a lawbreaker, but also an immoral person? In fairness, it must be said that Amennacht not only tried to settle scores with the enemy, but also fulfilled his duty. Servants of the place of truth, as the builders of the royal tombs were called, took an oath to the pharaoh, in which, under pain of severe punishment, they pledged to report any misconduct and suspicious events. So the question is, are there any other sources that could confirm Amennacht's accusations? What's your proof? Well, there is such a source, but it's the only one we have. There's a later protocol dating back to the 29th year of Ramses III. It records the charges that a worker named Paneb, incidentally a descendant of Paneb, brings against two foremen who stole a stone from the king's tomb, stole a bull from a temple, and slept with married women. Here's a passage from this document, quote, "And he slept with 3 married women, with Mrs. Menat when she was with Kenna, with Mrs. Tayu and S when she was with Necht Amun, and with Lady Tauret Hodeb when she was with Penta I've already heard something very similar somewhere. You also have a déjà vu. You're drunk, man. In this protocol, the worker says, quote, "So you saw Vizier Horus' point of view regarding the theft of stones when he was told, quote, Chief Master Paneb forced people to carry away stones from there, end of quote." Unfortunately, he doesn't say anything more, but there's a clear hint here that Paneb was punished for stealing from the royal tomb. However, what kind of punishment this was is unclear. Paneb apparently continued to hold the position of foreman after the incident. Perhaps all they did was shake a finger at him. It's noteworthy that none of the minutes of the village court sessions mentions Paneb's alleged drunken brawls, fights and other antics, let alone an accusation of murder. At the same time, it's hard to believe that this scoundrel could have killed several people in a small village and gotten away with it. Another question, did the denunciation compiled by Amennacht reach the vizier? Perhaps not. After all, the papyrus was found inside the village, which most likely means it never left its borders. But what if Paneb somehow found out about it and... "We'll find you anywhere." That said, the document found could have well been a copy that Amennacht kept for himself. This theory is backed by the fact that at the beginning of the text there's no long list of titles of the vizier to whom the message is addressed, a mandatory attribute of such dispatches. But what ultimately happened to Paneb? The punishment was a dreadful one. He was severely beaten with canes. His nose and ears were cut off. Well, this is just a quote from a popular article. In fact, we haven't got the slightest idea as to what finally happened to Paneb. Both he and his son disappear from record sometime between 1193 and 1185 BC, shortly after the denunciation was recorded. There's a theory that Paneb was executed, based on an ostracan dating from the 5th year of Ramses III, which mentions the murder or execution of a foreman. But his name is not mentioned, so it could easily have been someone else. Paneb's age at that point was approaching 70, so it's quite possible that he left this world peacefully. We do know, though, that the whistler Amennacht failed to achieve his goal. After Paneb, a man named Arnacht from a different family was appointed as foreman. So Paneb has gone down in history as one of the oldest known villains, but is this fair? Imagine your descendants condemning you based on a single note written by a top hater. Think about what colors this hater would paint your portrait with. The biggest Mexican guy I've ever seen walks into the bar. Let's keep in mind that one of the most important principles of historical research is verifying the reliability of sources by other sources. Was Paneb a cynical careerist, a murderer, or just a troublemaker who loved to drink and party? And Amennacht, is he an honest person who cannot remain silent when he sees injustice, or an envious slanderer? Let's hope that another ancient papyrus will fall into the hands of Egyptologists that will help us find the truth. Maybe you have your own theory? Please share in the comments. By the way, Paneb is also a character in the Stone of Light book series by French Egyptologist Christian Jacques. I'm Alexander Sokolov. See you next time.